Major funding for this program was provided by the American Legion. Additional funding was provided by Indiana University's Center on Representative Government, IU Credit Union Investment Services, Ice Miller Legal Counsel, the Indiana Military Museum, Lacey Johnson, and Jim Silberstein and Beth Kamen Silberstein. Additional funding was also provided by these underwriters.
So why is World War I important? Because a generation that bridged America between its agricultural high and the jet age is totally ignored.
To me, every one of those 14,000 headstones over there, it's a soldier with a mother, a father, husbands, wives, and children. There's a story under every headstone.
African Americans have fought in every conflict this country has had since the American Revolution. And it's no different than the First World War.
The greatest generation had a mother and father, and they're the ones that fought World War I.
There's one thing we know for sure. History does repeat itself. And if we don't learn from our history, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we'll make them again.
Samuel Woodfill was born in January 1883 in the small village of Bryantsburg, Indiana, just north of Madison. General Pershing considered him the greatest single hero in the American forces. Charles Harrison Forrest, the son of Millard Fillmore and Emily Forrest, was born in August 1888 in Scott County, Indiana. In 1899, his family moved to a small farm in Veedersburg, Indiana, where he lived until being among the first soldiers from Fountain County to leave for France. May Berry, the daughter of William and Ida Berry, was born east of Indianapolis, in Rush County. She was among the first in the American Red Cross Nursing Corps to enter the war, landing in Brest, France on Christmas Eve, 1917. Aaron Fisher became one of Indiana's most decorated soldiers in the Great War. Born in Lyle's Station, he was hailed as a hero by the French for bravery in action, but was subjected to discrimination within the Army. James Gresham was born in McLean County, Kentucky, before moving across the Ohio River to Evansville. He entered the trenches of eastern France at the end of 1917 and became the first American soldier to die in combat in World War I. Ernest Finley Duncan from Bloomington, Indiana, was a house painter by trade. He would exhibit great bravery during a night attack on his company and would be honored for his courage. Louis Carl Ruppelt was a carpenter in Goshen, Indiana, before enlisting with the United States Army. He was only 19 when he entered combat in the Battle of the Marne in Chateau-Thierry.
America is at a precipice in 1917. I would say that the people of the United States, generally speaking, They want to stop foreign entanglements. They want to stay out of a foreign war. They don't want to give the blood of America's sons and daughters on some battlefield in France or Italy or Russia. They prefer to be spectators. The Germans have declared unrestricted submarine warfare, and this is pushing a Wilson administration that has tried to keep out of the war desperately to a point where it can't stay out anymore.
And around the same time, through diplomatic channels, the Germans, they contact Mexico. So look, Mexico, we need to keep the Americans over there, not over in Europe. So make some trouble for them along the border. And when we're done over here, we will then help you out. We'll give you back parts of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. This is known as the Zimmerman Telegram. And the American government actually published it in the newspapers across the country. And the whole attitude of the isolationists then changed to, oh no, you're not going to be like this to the Americans. We're going to have to do something about it.
Part of that is we have to paint the enemy as, if not subhuman, as in some instances, certainly as an enemy, as somebody that is fighting for conquest, for power.
Wilson's domestic agenda is ruined. This is the reason politically that we finally make the decision to enter the war.
What compelled the young men and women of the United States to go over there when for years the mood of the country had been to stay out of foreign wars?
Young men feel that if this is what my country's doing, then it is one of the duties of citizenship, and the best way that I can support this is to help win the fight.
Sam Woodfill had been a soldier in the U.S. Army since enlisting in 1901, serving in both the Philippines and Alaska. In early April 1917, just after the U.S. entered World War I, he was initially promoted to first lieutenant and then captain. He embarked for France on April 16th aboard the USS Philadelphia. Like Woodfill, Aaron Fisher was also in the U.S. Army at the start of the Great War, having enlisted in 1911. He served in the 9th Cavalry and the 24th Infantry, both African-American regiments. Before going to France, he served in Mexico and the Philippines. On June 1, 1918, after graduating the Officer Candidate School at Fort Des Moines, he was promoted to second lieutenant and set sail for Europe on June 15th aboard the USS Covington. Ernest Duncan had been honorably discharged on June 16, 1915, after his first stint in the U.S. Army. He re-enlisted on April 28, 1917, and was aboard the USS Pocahontas, which sailed out of Hoboken, New Jersey for France on September 7, 1917. James Gresham was also a U.S. Army veteran by the start of the Great War, enlisting on April 23, 1914, and then serving with General Pershing in Mexico. He boarded his ship in Hoboken in June of 1917, arriving in Saint-Nazaire, France on June 26, 1917. Lottie Mae Berry graduated from the Deaconess Hospital School of Nursing in 1913. On September 7, 1917, she took the oath of office and was assigned to active service in the Army Nurse Corps. She began her journey overseas on board the SS George Washington, departing on the night of December 4th and landing in Brest, France on Christmas Eve 1917. Louis Ruppelt, like so many others from Indiana, responded to the call to arms by choosing to enlist in the U.S. Army, signing his papers on May 8, 1917. He went to camps in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, and Camp Greene in North Carolina for training. He left for France just short of a year later aboard the USAT Mount Vernon, sailing out of Hoboken on March 29, 1918. Charles Forrest was in the first group of soldiers to enlist and depart from Fountain County, signing up for service on September 20th of 1917. On that same day, Forrest was placed in the April 1918 replacement detachment and assigned to the 26th Division's 104th Infantry. On May 2, 1918, just short of 8 months later, he embarked for France on the SS Great Northern, sailing from Hoboken as a replacement in the Yankee Division. The movement from their homes and families in Indiana to the war in France would take each of the men and women who chose to serve on an incredible journey.
So the movement overseas is an interesting experience for any doughboy. Most of these people have probably not been out of their county, and people who would have never probably left Indiana. The first stop is some training camp somewhere that spring up all over the United States. They make the very slight change between your civilian life and the military life. Early wake up and training all day long, both in the classroom and field exercises and physical fitness. And they teach you to march and wear the uniform and fire a weapon. So one day you get notice that tomorrow morning we're going to board a train. It either goes to New York, and from New York you'll go to Hoboken, New Jersey. Probably get a night or two in New York City. And in Hoboken you'll get on a small lighter, and it'll take you out to one of the ships that will cross the Atlantic. Or you go to Camp Upton in New York, the largest deployment and receiving station, and the same thing will happen. So most of the vessels that transport our soldiers overseas in World War I, they are ocean liners that used to belong to Germany and have been repurposed as troop ships. Or they'll be purpose-built, kind of liberty ships of some sort or the other. And they'll either come into a port in France, like Le Havre, or they'll come into England. If they come into England, they'll almost immediately, after marshaling there, get on another train and go to take a channel boat across to France. Or they'll come directly into France and they'll be put directly on the French railroad. They're put on what's called a 40 and 8. It held 40 men and 8 horses. And everybody says the same thing. It's like being jammed into a sardine can. And so they'll take the 40 and 8 up to another marshaling area far closer to the front. They'll do some more training up there. They'll get organized. There'll be a long march, and then they'll jump into that either defensive sector or right into the line if we're already in one of the big offenses. They see incredible sights. They will get to see New York and London and Paris, places they've only read about. So it's a pretty exhilarating experience. The whole process from the time they're a civilian to the time they're overseas could be 3 months. But remember, the idea is to get them over as quickly as possible.
Before the end of 1917, the United States, and Indiana specifically, would learn of the first American casualties on foreign soil in the Great War.
Americans were deeply affected by their first casualties. They always are. There were some people that believed, very much the optimists, that America just entering the war might bring the Germans to the table. It's not as crazy as it sounds, because Ludendorff and Hindenburg both expect a good deal of time before the Americans could make deployments that would make any difference. In fact, on the Marne battle, when they capture Americans and bring them in and find out they're from multiple divisions, the German general staff's in shock. They can't believe they're Americans there that quickly. And Ludendorff says prophetically then, it's over. It's just a matter of time.
It's during this period of time, 1914, that James Gresham joins the Army. Originally, he's down in Mexico, chasing around Pancho Villa, who had been making raids into the United States. Blackjack Pershing and his men, including James Bethel Gresham, will head overseas in early 1917. It's going to be pretty quick training, a few weeks. They're in the trenches in the eastern countryside of France, ready to face the enemy. By this point, Gresham has become a corporal in rank. He is going to be involved in this warfare in the early morning hours of November 3rd, 1917. In the sector that Gresham and his fellow soldiers were in Eastern Europe, it was lightly contested, certainly not a major battlefront.
So trench raids had different purposes, interesting all on their own. Sometimes it's go capture somebody. Another region is just go get intelligence. Try not to engage the enemy. How many guys are in the trench? Could you count? And then the third one's what happened to those guys. Just go in and disrupt the enemy, kill a couple of them, but get out of there as fast as you can.
Stories are that Gresham didn't necessarily even recognize these as Germans coming in, that he said, "Don't shoot, we're Americans," and that the Germans then shoot him and his subsequent soldiers, Tom Enright and Merle Hay, also dying in those early morning hours, and they die on the battlefront.
His death is an important event for America because it brings the reality of war home. It kind of sends the message to the country, we are at war.
James Beshel Gresham was the first to die amongst those. The first American combat fatality of World War I, being the first to make the ultimate sacrifice for his country.
To Indiana, it's almost a point of pride. We, as a state, have given one of our sons in the cause of freedom and liberty for Europe and the world, and he's one of us. They were, and they will continue to always be, a touchstone to America's role in the war.
The contributions of Hoosiers in the Great War went beyond those of just men. By the war's end, more than 10,000 nurses had served overseas in the Army Nurse Corps. Of those, Hoosier nurses were represented as part of Lilly Base Hospital 32, stationed in the town of Contrexeville in France.
If we hear anything about women serving in World War I, you usually hear about one of two things. You hear about the Red Cross, you hear about the Salvation Army, the affiliated services, all in the guise of the Donut Dolly is usually how you hear about them. But what you don't hear about is the birth of the Army Nurse Corps. And so you get the first women coming over as part of the Army as nurses during the World War I period. But they're not organized by the Army. They're all affiliated, they're all, what we would call NGOs. So suddenly we have Army formations that are dominated by women. And they form most commonly the base hospital. They are in harm's way. I think that's an important difference about World War I at the personal level.
Lottie Mae Berry epitomized the service and sacrifice of those nurses in the Great War. Her service was short, but meaningful.
When the war started, Mae Berry was already a qualified nurse working in a hospital. At that time, the Army Nurses Corps had very few nurses in the armed forces. In May of 1917, Mae Berry volunteered for service with the Army Nurse Corps. They went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, which is near Indianapolis, for training and were sworn in the Army Nurses Corps in September 1917.
Eli Lilly and Company privately funded what would become Base Hospital 32, located in the far eastern French town of Contrexeville. Doctors and nurses, primarily from the state of Indiana, were enlisted to staff the hospital.
They moved from Indiana to New York to ship to France. On the 4th of December 1917, they boarded the SS Washington and sailed for France from Hoboken, New Jersey. During the voyage, about 30 of the nurses became very ill. They became pier-side at Brest, France, the morning of Christmas Eve. They debarked from the ship 26 December. Mae Berry was one of those that was very ill. She went immediately into a hospital and died on 30 December 1917. So she was actually in the armed forces only 4 months. Her field hospital, hospital number 32, or Lilly Hospital, continued on to Contrexeville, France, down in the Vosges Mountains. She had about 4 months service when she died of illness and died as the first member of the American Nurse Corps to die in France in World War I. She was buried in Carfratras Cemetery in Brest, France, the day after she died. And in 1922, her remains were exhumed and permanently buried here in Wazane American Cemetery, Plot D, Row 21, Grave 21, where she rests today.
During the last days of May 1918, a powerful German offensive had broken through the Chemin des Dames front. German troops were advancing rapidly toward the Marne River. The Allied situation was critical, and reserves from all parts of the Western Front were rushed to this region. Among the troops hurriedly moved here was the American 2nd Division. And in what would become a defining moment, the 3rd Division would earn the nickname Rock of the Marne for their actions in the Battle of Belleau Wood.
So the spring offensive of 18 is to bring the French or the British to the peace table before the Americans can make a difference. The idea is to split the French and the British. They drive the British to the Channel, they drive the French to Paris. One of the two of them are going to come to the table. And if you're lucky, both. Then the war's over.
Toward the ends of May 1918, the German army commenced an offensive. The French defenses were fairly thin. The Germans broke through and reached the Marne River right behind me on the 31st of May. During this period, General Pershing pledged General Foch that he would agree to having American forces fight with the French forces. The 2nd and the 3rd American divisions were committed to this area. Behind me, to the east, is the Marne River with a bridge traversing the Marne in the city of Château-Thierry. The 7th Machine Gun Battalion of the 3rd Division was the first unit to reach there and help repulse the Germans before they blew the bridge up. Since the Germans couldn't cross the Marne, they switched their axis of advance more to the southwest, toward the area of Belleau Wood and Vaux, where the 2nd Division set up their defense.
The 2nd and 3rd Divisions near Château-Thierry displayed brilliant fighting to repulse repeated German counterattacks. The 2nd Division, starting in the morning of June 6th, took the attack to the Germans, and after prolonged and bitter fighting, recaptured from them the strong positions of Belleau Wood, Baresch, and Vaux. A German report stated,
Die zweite amerikanische Division ist als sehr gute Division einzustufen. Die Angriffe wurden geschickt und rücksichtslos ausgeführt. Unsere Kräfte konnten den Vormarsch der Infanterie nicht aufhalten. Der Kampfgeist der Amerikaner ist noch immer unerschütterlich.
Sergeant Ernest Finley Duncan was born in Bloomington. As a 17-year-old, he enlisted in the Army in 1912.
The first memory I have of my grandmother and my great-grandmother talking about when he joined the Army. I got the idea he joined when he was a little too young and maybe have lied about it. The colorful part that I remember was he had kissed his mother goodbye and walked through the house and jumped the train and waved to her as he went out of town. Supposedly that was the last time she saw him alive.
He re-enlisted again in 1915. So when the war started in 1917, he shipped to France. He was serving in the 9th Infantry.
I remember my grandmother saying it was a big deal about the battle he was in, Battle of Belleau Woods.
In the eyes of the German command, the Battle of Belleau Wood would in fact be a pivotal battle for the Americans.
Sollten die Amerikaner auch nur kurz die Oberhand gewinnen, würde sich dies auf die Moral der Alliierten und die Kriegsdauer äußerst ungünstig auswirken. Es geht uns nicht um die Besetzung eines unbedeutenden Waldes oder Dorfes. Wir sind besorgt, dass die Propaganda, die besagt, dass die amerikanische Armee der Deutschen gleich oder überlegen ist, erfolgreich sein wird.
Severe fighting took place near Belleau Wood on June 7th and 8th, but resulted in only minor gains. After an artillery barrage on June 9th, an American counterattack was launched. Duncan's company was dug in just west of Hill 204, to the north of the village of Monod, along the road leading north to Vaux. The company came under attack by German artillery on the night of June 10th. Corporal William Young of South Dakota was there and later reported that Sergeant Duncan was wounded by shell fire, and within 5 minutes, he had died from his injuries.
He must have had nerves of steel to keep going. For someone to have that kind of attitude that he had a job to do, and he obviously wasn't afraid to stay.
Duncan had kept his machine gun in action under a severe artillery bombardment and machine gun fire. For his actions in battle, Ernest Duncan was awarded the Silver Star. In a news article in the Bloomington Evening World, it was noted that he had shown great bravery during a night attack on the 9th Infantry. He also received the Croix de Guerre, bestowed by the French command.
My grandmother knew that he was a hero, that he had helped others. He saved lives.
He was initially buried in Essam-sur-Marne in a temporary cemetery. In 1919, he was moved here to what became Aisne-Marne American Cemetery.
Sergeant Duncan was the first from Monroe County to be killed in action during the war. In all, the 2nd Division suffered 8,100 casualties in fighting near Belleau. Bloomington's Ernest Duncan is included in the names of those who died at the Battle of Belleau Wood. Louis Carl Ruppelt was from Goshen, Indiana, and was working as a carpenter when America entered the First World War.
He enlisted in the U.S. Army in May 1917, was posted to Camp Green, North Carolina, where he became a member of Company G, 2nd Battalion, 38th Infantry. Apparently a very capable soldier, by the time they shipped to France in April 1918, he had reached the rank of sergeant. The 3rd Infantry Division earned the nickname the Rock of the Marne during fighting in this area. Part of the 3rd Division, the 38th Infantry, was training when the German offensive of May 1918 happened. They were rushed to the Château-Thierry salient and deployed to the east of the town of Château-Thierry along the banks of the Marne River. They held a defense against the Germans for the following month until the 15th of July, when a great German offensive tried to cross the Marne River.
Just after midnight on the morning of July 15th, the German artillery opened up, and by 2 a.m. there was a sudden increase of machine gun fire as the Germans began attempts to cross the river. Ruppelt's Company G was positioned in an outpost zone as a strongpoint near the railroad tracks in Metzi. His company had been given orders to hold the position at all costs. Around 3 a.m., the German 10th Division crossed the Marne, directly at Ruppelt's position, and held the railroad tracks just to the east, when Company G initiated a counterattack, driving the Germans back across the river. Along the railway passing through Metzi, Company G held out until late in the afternoon of July 15th, despite all efforts by the Germans to capture it. Division reports suggest Ruppelt was likely killed around 10:30 or 11 that morning during fierce fighting against the German 47th Infantry. Sergeant James McFadden reported that Ruppelt was killed by a high-explosive shell, about 600 yards from the Metzi train station.
He defended his position with his platoon until was almost annihilated, and he was wounded in action. He withdrew to a position farther away where he died of his wounds. But due to his heroism, he was awarded the nation's second highest decoration for valor, the Distinguished Service Cross.
Sergeant Louis C. Ruppelt, Company G, 38th Infantry, for extraordinary heroism in action near Metzi, France, July 15, 1918. Sergeant Ruppelt held his post on the bank of the Marne until his entire platoon had been annihilated and he himself wounded. After being carried a short distance to the rear, he continued to direct the defense of the position until killed.
After his death, he was temporarily buried near Metzi, France. His remains were exhumed in 1919 and temporarily buried in an American cemetery at Charans-Enel, which became the Voisin American Cemetery.
The German line has the salient, this bump out into the Allied line. So the idea is to straighten the line there. And this is the second big American real major operation. And this is an important battle for America.
First American Expeditionary Forces and their divisions were placed along the salient with the plan to reduce the salient and capture the German service members, capture German equipment, and reduce the salient here before the end of the war. The Sentier-des-Vosges is a small town, a village in the Vosges Mountains. The 92nd Division actually for a period of time was in the trenches near Sentier-des-Vosges from August to September 1918. And in that short period of time, the 92nd suffered around 350 casualties with several combat actions there.
The 92nd, 93rd Division, which are the segregated African American divisions, they're kind of sliced off initially to the French right off the bat. The 92nd Division is a good example of willing patriots, African American segregated unit. They still choose to go fight. And they're one of only 2 African American divisions that fight in the war. They're also noteworthy because they're not really set up for success. A lot of the officers at the divisional level are sort of highly critical of their ability to fight.
From August 23rd to the 30th of 1918, the 92nd Division was affiliated with the French 97th Division and participated in the occupation of the Sandier sector. This sector was in the Vosges, which lay just north of Sandier. The small village of Lisieux is situated at the southern exit of the Salle Pass. And this is where Lieutenant Fisher and the 366th Infantry were stationed. At the end of August, the 92nd Division assumed command of this sector and held it until relieved on September 20th.
Lieutenant Fisher was in the 366th Infantry Regiment with the 92nd. He did serve in the Sentier des Vosges, and they were there for training. Typically, that region was used for training both for the line and for the sector.
Aaron Fisher is a unique story. He was 16 years old when he left here, joined the Army, and that's 1911, and then 6 years later, he's thrown into the greatest conflict the world's ever seen. His time in the Army before the First World War, Aaron Fisher is part of the Buffalo Soldiers. They were still having skirmishes in the Southwest, in New Mexico and in Arizona and parts of Texas after the turn of the century. When he is trained, those are some of the same soldiers who fought in Cuba at the Battle of San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. So Fisher is learning from men who've been under fire and how to actually maintain their composure, how to think under fire. When he gets to France, he's already been under fire. He knows what to do, and he does what he's been trained to do. He is a first lieutenant. He's in charge of a platoon of probably 30 to maybe 40 people that he's responsible for. But he's only 25, 26 years old.
And Aaron Fisher is put out among one of the front trenches with a 7-man outpost, and he's commanding his own men. And all of a sudden, the fighting picks up. The artillery barrages, aerial bombardments, and so forth.
His unit is attacked with hand grenades, rifles, flamethrowers. It's a pretty chaotic scene.
It was a raiding force. It was estimated 50 German raiders. German raiding forces were a kind of an elite group, and they had certain weapons that they had perfected for the trenches. Sharpened shovels, trench knives, which were brass knuckles with the knives where they could use it this club and cut too. Short-barreled automatic rifles. And they wanted to take back the line, but they also wanted to create terror. That's what they were facing that night. So they were cut off and attacked. And in that fight, it all comes together.
And he manages to maintain his composure. His unit's being overrun, and he's fighting back. He's injured, refuses to leave the battlefield until the American counterattack is successful to drive the Germans off. And in that process, he lost 3 or 4 men, and several more were injured.
He was prepared for that moment. He was able to lead these 7 guys and keep them from panicking and keep them fighting. He was severely wounded, and what we know is that the guys that were fighting thought, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And he got up, and in spite of a horrendous wound, he continued to lead them, and to hear a clear voice telling you exactly what to do, where to move, saved the day.
And if Fisher had actually panicked, the American line could have collapsed.
When the reinforcements got there, most of the German raiders had been killed at that point. And for that, of course, he received the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest medal of valor in our country.
And Fisher is evacuated eventually to the rear and spends the rest of the war in a hospital trying to recover. The American Army had decided not to award African Americans the Medal of Honor during the First World War. African Americans were awarded for bravery and heroism. None were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. But if you read what's on the few records that exist, the man went above and beyond. It's possible he could have gotten it. It's tragic that most people in Indiana don't know who he was. They don't know what he accomplished. And because of the way race relations in the United States worked then and sometimes works now, we're often faced with looking at a situation where we almost have 2 lists or 2 different ways of looking at, here is Samuel Woodfield, for instance, who's the most decorated soldier from Indiana. Here's Aaron Fisher, who is the most highly decorated African-American soldier from Indiana. They're 2 of the most highly decorated, if not the most highly decorated men from Indiana from the First World War, and we don't know who Aaron Fisher was or what he did.
This guy's willingness and desire to want to serve his country through the military in a country that didn't really appear to care much about him as a human being. Okay, we're not too far removed from the Civil War at that point. obviously a segregated and racist society, yet he would choose to serve his country in that way and put himself in harm's way. If I were in his shoes, I don't know how inclined I would want to be to serve a country that didn't really appear to care a whole bunch about me as a human. His actions in that engagement that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross were probably Medal of Honor worthy. When you look at this county's military history, this guy is a rock star. I mean, he is right up there with the absolute very best of it. That's the little nugget, if you will, that really drew me in. I mean, this is a big, big deal, this guy in this county.
Pershing is an interesting character because the one thing he does care about is an American offensive. An offensive that can be totally attributed to the Americans. And wouldn't it be nice if that same offensive also resulted in the end of the war? And he gets that. He gets that in the Meuse. And so it's important to understand that is the largest offensive operation the Army has ever done. It is not outdone by the Battle of Bulge or Normandy or anything else or Vicksburg. It's a large offensive with multiple divisions. Every division in France is a part of that in one way or the other. It is the largest American offensive in history.
It's covering a huge area. Of course, it's named for the Meuse River that forms the one boundary in the Argonne Forest, and it's that whole push up towards Sedan, which is the important railway junction. And if we capture Sedan, you cut off the lateral lines of communication for the German forces, and that allows all the Allies to move forward.
The area that we're standing on right now was attacked by several American divisions. This was the point in the battle that had heavy, sustained, up-close and personal combat. And this is when the war is taken away from the generals and the colonels and even the lieutenant colonels. Now it's down to the captains, the lieutenants, and the sergeants. And we're talking at the very front where the company commanders and platoon leaders and first sergeants are leading their men into battle. And the divisions were becoming worn out a little bit and tired from sustained combat. The Corps commander sends in the 5th Division. If you come from behind the chapel over the hill, the trees, imagine the trees weren't here back then. It was just open farmland. And they came down across the bottom. It came up this side. Intense hand-to-hand combat in some cases on this hill. And they made it all the way to the top of this hill where, just like the rest of the soldiers, they're looking over yet another open field covered by machine gun artillery fire and another town to take at the bottom. After they take that town, they're going to have to go up another hill into more woods covered by machine gun and artillery fire. The heavy fighting really sustained by the 5th Division, especially to the east of here near the village of Cunel and the Bois de la Poultière and the Bois des Rats. It was intense, very well defended by the Germans.
It was in Cunel where First Lieutenant Sam Woodfill would earn the only Medal of Honor bestowed upon a Hoosier during World War I. He would later be cited by General Pershing himself as the greatest single hero in the American forces. After enlisting in 1901, he fought in the Philippines, served in the Mexican border campaign, and spent time in Alaska. He was married to his sweetheart Lorena on Christmas Day 1917, and in April 1918, he was promoted to first lieutenant and shipped to France with the 60th Infantry of the 5th Division, leaving New York City on April 16th. Woodfill was born in 1883, which made him older and more experienced than many other lieutenants on the line. On October 12, 1918, Woodfill was leading his men with bayonets fixed through a fog up a hill and through the woods outside Cunel.
He tells his men to stay where they are, and he goes out in front of them, which lieutenants don't normally do, but he was a sergeant before.
As soon as they stepped out into the open, the machine guns from the general area of Cunel started shooting at him. And he says, you guys wait here and follow me about 25 yards, and I'm going ahead and I'm going to see if I can't silence these machine guns. He stepped out of the woods again. He detected machine gun fire coming from the church steeple. And the church steeple was located about 400 yards up towards the town of Cunel. He fired a quick clip into that area, and the machine gun fire quit. He immediately knew that he had to move because other machine gunners would be zeroing in on him. So he got out of the foxhole and ran to the next foxhole. In the second foxhole, the machine gunner opened up from a barn, and the barn was at a distance of about 400 yards. He fired a clip into the area where he thought the soldier was in the loft of the barn, and the machine gun fire quit. He started towards the other machine gun nest. He finally got around where he could just see the top of the helmet of the soldier who was firing the gun. And normally a gun would be 5 soldiers operating the machine gun nest. He fired, and the machine gun quit firing. And then another helmet appeared there. And so he fired again. And he did this 5 times. And he killed all in that machine gun nest. He then detected a machine gun nest up near the edge of the woods that was connected to a bunch of tunnels that went back into the woods, and that was the edge of the enemy's front line. He again shot 3 soldiers as they tried to man the machine gun nest, and they didn't hear anything. And he went up and he jumped in it, and when he did, he landed on a German soldier. And this German soldier came around with his Luger to shoot him, but Sam beat him to the draw and killed the soldier. Another German soldier came around the edge of the trench with a bayonet in hand. Sam was out of ammunition. So Sam reached up on the edge, and there was a trench tool, and he grabbed that and he came down on the top of the second German soldier's head and killed him. The first soldier who he had shot was stunned and came alive, and Sam turned around to shoot him with his Colt semi-automatic, but the gun jammed. So Sam took the trench tool and killed the second soldier.
Sitting in his foxhole after his action, he was surrounded by devastation and left with the knowledge he had killed some 20 men. Woodfill's actions had penetrated the German line more than 200 yards farther than any other group that day. By the end of his action, most of his company was missing. His captain had been killed. A sergeant directly to his left had been shot, took 3 steps, and died, just moments before Woodfill stepped out of the woods to advance on the first machine gun. He slept that night in the foxhole, but woke feeling ill from the effects of the mustard gas and was removed to the hospital. His men, however, were dispatched the following day to the Bois de la Poutier, just north of Cunel, where over 1,000 men lost their lives to achieve a 550-yard advance. General Pershing's Argonne offensive drew the war to a rapid close, and in February 1919, Woodfill was presented the Medal of Honor, the only soldier from Indiana so honored, at a ceremony in Chaumont, France.
That is some incredible heroic actions from one not-so-young lieutenant. He is one of the soldiers that General Pershing himself referred to as the greatest soldier of the war.
On May 7, 1932, Woodfill was retired at the rank of captain. After his death on August 10, 1951, he was moved from his burial site near Madison to Arlington National Cemetery. He was laid to rest at the rank of major, 30 yards from the grave of General Pershing.
He did what a soldier was supposed to do. He was a soldier's soldier. When the United States entered World War I, they had about 200,000 members of the armed forces. 18 months later, when the war ended, there were 4 million in our armed forces. Charles Forrest typifies the motivated volunteer servicemen that fought here in France.
That's the experience that I think is so important from World War I, which has been overshadowed and that people lose, is that you have this preponderance of Americans from pretty much across the entire country. He seems as a very good example that stands in for that American soldier everyman in the World War I period. Somebody that is not a professional soldier. He volunteers, he's overseas, and he's involved in pretty much most of the big major campaigns.
He was like a lot of the young men at that time. You know, they knew it was a world war that if they didn't go there, it was probably going to come here. So, you know, they stepped up and did what they needed to do.
Sam Woodfill, he survived, Medal of Honor, incredible actions, but I submit that thousands of soldiers performed actions just like that. Maybe they didn't receive recognition. Some gave their lives while doing it. A good example of a young soldier, not really well known, but his name was Charles Forrest. He was placed as an infantryman into the 26th Infantry Division, which was known as the Yankee Division. So imagine a young man from, Midwest getting put in with a bunch of these Yankees.
I think he would have not had a second thought about being transferred into another unit. They would have jailed and went right on. There would have been teasing going on, of him being a Hoosier or from Indiana, and they were East Coasters or whatever. I mean, that's normal. When you're a soldier, after you've finished your basic training, you are a soldier, period. And every soldier that you serve with is your brother.
26th Division is an example of the National Guard being right in the fight with the regular Army pretty much from the get-go.
They were primarily National Guard soldiers from the Northeast. The 101st Infantry was from Massachusetts, the 102nd from Connecticut, the 103rd from Maine, and the 104th also from Massachusetts. Charles Forrest served in A Company, 1st Battalion, 104th Infantry. We know that he was born in 1888 in the state of Indiana. He was one of 20 individuals from his home county, the first to enter the armed forces after the war started. He was a farmer. He wasn't a professional soldier. He was inducted in 1917. He served at Camp Taylor and Camp Shelby in Mississippi, but he didn't leave for France until May of 1918, when he shipped from Hoboken, New Jersey in a replacement draft.
The 26th Division is one of the hard-fighting divisions in the war. It's also one of the earliest ones to get over there. So he would have come in as a replacement. So he gets into a division that's in a lot of fighting. And a lot of this may have to do with timing, in that if he volunteers and enlists on his own, he's in the system earlier. When they have their very first casualties and they need to rebuild, he's in that earlier pool of people. He's in a division that's in all the big major battles, and his timing is such that he's participating in all of those.
The YD participated in 3 big campaigns, the Aisne-Marne, the Saint-Mihiel, and the Meuse-Argonne. And although the Meuse-Argonne was the greatest offensive with the most casualties during World War I, for the 26th Division, their action in the Aisne-Marne offensive was the biggest with the most casualties.
Before Private Forrest joined his division on the ground in France, the 26th had gone into a combat sector 4 months before in the Chemin des Dames, before moving to the Saint-Mihiel to man a sector of the defense. Charles reported to the 104th Infantry of the 26th Division as a replacement soldier on June 7th. He would be joining his regiment just south and west of Belleau Wood, less than 1 month before the biggest battle his division would fight during the entire war.
During the German offensive of May 1918, Charles Forrest Company relieved the 1st Battalion 6th Marines inside Belleau Wood. They were moved north to take over a sector that encompassed Belleau Woods between the towns of Torcy and Baresh, a little north of Chateau-Thierry. They were there for 2 weeks before their offensive, from about the 4th of July until the 18th of July. During that time, they took a lot of artillery. They took casualties from gas and from shelling. On the 18th of July was the offensive to reduce the Aisne-Marne salient. So from the town of Baresh, the 104th Infantry took the towns of Belleau, Torcy, Givray, until they got up to a German defensive line centered around Epierre. This combat action was over a period of about a week, from 18 July until the 25th of July. During that time, they fought for the town of Epierre 3 times, making attacks, getting repulsed, sometimes involving hand-to-hand combat, a lot of gas, a lot of artillery. It became a very confused battlefield.
Charles Forrest had been with the 104th for only 45 days and had been in battle for less than a week before being wounded in action. The company's morning report of July 22nd shows the number of killed in action and those wounded in action, including Charles Forrest. For nearly 2 months, he would be off the line at the field hospital until September 15th, when he returned to his company just after it had completed combat actions in the next major battle of the American forces. While Charles Forrest was recuperating, the 26th Division moved to the Samiel salient with orders to close the gap.
The American forces and their divisions were placed along the salient with the plan to reduce the salient and capture the German service members, capture German equipment, and reduce the salient here.
The 26th Division attacked at 8 a.m. on September 12th after a 7-hour artillery barrage. By nightfall, it had advanced more than 2 miles. General Pershing then directed the 26th Division to rush to Aton-Châtel, about 8 miles further, to meet advanced elements of the 1st Division.
They met in Vignoles-les-Aton-Châtel, where they closed the salient, captured the remaining German forces that were still within the salient, essentially won the battle in one day by September 13th.
Charles Forrest would rejoin the 104th Infantry Regiment 2 days later and move along with the 26th Division to participate in the Meuse-Argonne offensive.
The 104th Regiment, attacking in mid-October alongside their sister regiment, the 102nd, they were about 5 miles east of here, just on the other side of the Meuse River, and they were given some incredible terrain to go through. Hills that are even bigger than these, a little more heavily wooded, well defended. Your sergeant yells at you, "Get up, get moving. We're gonna move out through the woods." So you have machine gun fire coming at you from the front, artillery, especially in the woods, coming down. You have to climb over the wire, and the occasional German soldier who's still hiding there waiting for you to pass him.
On October 17, 1918, Charles Forrest was killed by a gunshot wound along the tree line of the Bois d'Amont near Flabat. He would lie dead on the battlefield for a month, until found by Chaplain Ernest Eastman of Massachusetts on November 17th, 6 days after the war's end. He was buried that same day in a battle area grave, near where he was killed in action.
This soldier, Charles Forrest, in mid-October, he gave that sacrifice, that ultimate sacrifice, and was buried nearby in one of those hundreds of small cemeteries or graves around here. So he left behind his home, came over to the excitement and adventure of war, but unfortunately he was killed in action.
Whatever had to be done is what he did, without question, I'm sure, which most soldiers do. I mean, you just do what you're asked to do, and you go beyond. I'm proud to know these things that I didn't know. It makes me more proud of him. World War I's about forgotten. Hopefully those things aren't forgotten, because there's one thing we know for sure. History does repeat itself. And if we don't learn from our history, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we'll make them again.
If you asked a child in 1938 what the pivotal battle in American history was, they'd give you one or two answers. Say the Battle of Gettysburg or Meuse-Argonne. If you asked that same question in 1945, universally, they would say one of two things: D-Day Normandy or the Battle of the Bulge. So why is World War I important? Because a generation that bridged America between its agricultural high and the jet age is totally ignored. A generation that made so many changes in this country, social changes in the role of women, in race relations. In World War I, when the discussions were open, there was no way that there was going to be 2 African-American divisions, let alone 2 African-American combat divisions. Not only do we have 2 divisions that are African-American, but we have officers who are African-American. So it changes things for women. It changes things for people of color. It changes the way we think. We start to think politically with a worldview. So I would say this is the generation that shapes the world power. These are the people that make the decisions that make us victorious in World War II.
I'm proud to know these things that I didn't know, before. It makes me more proud of him.
It's also important that Americans realize that African Americans have fought in every conflict this country has had since the American Revolution. Because the way narratives are often structured and stories are told, African Americans get left out, and then all of a sudden you find the story of someone like Aaron Fisher. We need to know and understand that African Americans actually did serve.
I'm very proud of him. Beyond belief. Yes. Oh, yes. I wish I could talk to him. He was ours, a Hoosier, here in Indiana.
and I just love him.
Especially this day and age, I think we need to go back and look at what people were willing to do for other countries. It's not just it wasn't for ourselves. We turned around and helped our allies.
Memorial Day service to me is our most important thing.
Major funding for this program was provided by the American Legion. Additional funding was provided by Indiana University's Center on Representative Government, IU Credit Union Investment Services, Ice Miller Legal Counsel, the Indiana Military Museum, Lacey Johnson, and Jim Silberstein and Beth Kamen Silberstein. Additional funding was also provided by these underwriters: